What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. In this video, we are going to be taking an in-depth dive and looking at Melvin Gordon, the newly acquired running back for the Denver Broncos, giving you guys an expected fantasy outlook for 2020. I'm going to be doing this for all the fantasy relevant players, so hit that like and subscribe button for more. Also, check us out on fantasyaddictionnetwork.com for a full list of rankings to see how these guys all shape out. But without further ado, let's look at Melvin Gordon. So last year, a bit of a tumultuous season for Melvin Gordon. Starts the year out on a contract holdout that really did not go his way at all. The Chargers were not willing to budge on their initial offer, and it really just turned into a extended vacation for Melvin Gordon as Austin Eckler turned out to be one of the most efficient running backs and pretty much rendered Melvin Gordon's return unnecessary. And I think he kind of read the tea leaves and realized, crap, this didn't work out. So he comes back in week 5 and it's like, okay, guys, I'm here again, and slowly ramps up his usage. And by the end of the year, he was actually producing really well from a fantasy perspective. But I doubt many people actually remember that, because if you had Melvin Gordon, you basically had 8 weeks where he was either on your bench because he was not on the field, or when he was on the field, he was incredibly sluggish and not able to get anything done. So, very weird year for Melvin Gordon. We're kind of have to teach this in like a tale of two halves. If you were able to trade for Melvin Gordon late, you probably have a better view of how last season went for you. And I'll explain why in a second. But overall, finishing the year with 12 games played, 162 carries, 612 rushing yards, 42 receptions, and 296 receiving yards, a total of 9 touchdowns in 12 games. That's still incredibly high. And on pace again to hit about 1,200 scrimmage yards. He had hit over 1,300 scrimmage yards his previous few seasons. So finishing the year as the 23rd best fantasy points running back, 180.8 points, and then 15.1 fantasy points per game. But again, as I've explained to the beginning of this, you really kind of have to tell this from weeks 1 through 8 versus weeks 9 through 17. In weeks 1 through 8, obviously 1 through 4, he wasn't on the field, and then just you can clearly look at his attempts and his yards per carry. His usage started to ramp up after week 8. He wasn't very efficient coming back, was not on the same page as the rest of the team. Took him a few weeks to really start getting back into that Melvin Gordon form. And once he got back, well, then you could see he had 2 weeks in a row where he finished as a top 6 running back, jumped back down to a running back 3, up to a running back 2, a couple more running back 1 weeks, then finishes the year with another top 6 running back week. So that second half of the season, if you had him, with the exception of week 15 where they just got destroyed by Minnesota and there was no running game to speak of, it was a really decent season for the second half of the year. So had he had two halves like that, we'd still be talking about Melvin Gordon as one of the premier talents in the NFL. So there's definitely a huge range of outcomes in what we can expect with him going to Denver. Obviously, we can tell just based on his personal story, the holdout didn't work out. The amount of money that Denver gave him, although a lot for a running back, was significantly less than what the Chargers had offered him the year before. So the holdout didn't work, and you got to pour one out for him. But from a expectation of what we think that the Broncos are going to do, we know the Broncos want to run the ball. They had one of the lowest pass volumes offenses when they had Drew Lock in last year. And although I do think they're going to open things up with Drew Lock there and all the additional weapons that they added, I don't expect them to turn into like this super pass heavy team. And even if they do, Melvin Gordon still commands a lot of volume in the passing game, averaging around 5 targets per game. I would expect that to not necessarily continue exactly, but still you can expect him to be pretty heavily involved in the pass game. Philip Lindsay was actually kind of getting phased out of the pass game last year. Royce Freeman was getting more passing down work, so I would imagine that Melvin Gordon will basically take Royce Freeman's role in the pass game. And even if he ends up splitting carries 50-50 or 60-40 with Lindsay, being involved in the pass game is what you're really wanting from a fantasy perspective. So here's a few stats I want to talk about though in terms of Melvin Gordon's efficiency last year. So his breakaway run rate was 3.7%, which was really low at number 29. Evaded tackles per game, he was a bit elusive, but still in the running back 2 range at 20th with 4.1. His yards created per touch was abysmal at 0.85, which was 89th in the NFL. Now here's the other interesting thing. He had a 61.1% light front carry rate. That's 7th. And on those carries, he averaged 4.7 yards per carry. When he played against a stacked front, which was 14.8% of the time, which is pretty low for a running back, he only averaged 1.2 yards per carry. So what I'm getting at with that is if Drew Lock is not all that and defenses don't fear him, this could be really bad news for Melvin Gordon. If this turns into a run heavy team that they can't really trust Drew Lock and he's not opening things up in the passing game, it's going to be a bad year for Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon is a volume dependent back. I mean, I might be a little bit besmirching to put him in this light because he is better in the passing game, but I feel very similarly when I look at the efficiency of Melvin Gordon as I do when I look at Leonard Fournette, where he's getting so much volume that he continues to be a fantasy producer, but throughout his career, his yards per carry has always been a bit lower than what you'd expect. And while he gets things done based on volume alone, volume is required for him to be fantasy relevant at all. So if he's getting volume in Denver, but it's not on the back of having an efficient offense that actually keeps defenses honest, it could turn really sour for him very quickly. Now, another reason why Melvin Gordon is very fantasy relevant is how good he is at getting the ball into the end zone when he gets carries inside the 10. So he had over 20 carries inside the 10. That's 13th in the NFL, but keep in mind he missed a quarter of the season, so that's pretty insane. And then back to what I was talking about, when we take out the first 8 weeks, the 4 weeks he wasn't there, and the 4 weeks that he was terrible coming back, you just look at that back half of the season, he finished 7th in total points and 7th in points per game. So he was a running back 1 once he got going again. If Drew Lock is at least average, I mean, it's not like Philip Rivers was tearing, he wasn't tearing the roof off anywhere last year. So if the Broncos can just be average with Drew Lock, Melvin Gordon could actually be a tremendous value in the 3rd round right now. Currently, we have him projected for 932 rushing yards, 44 receptions, and 325 receiving yards with 10 total touchdowns. But if the Broncos are at least decent, this is his floor, and he could very easily jump up another 30 to 40 fantasy points if the Broncos give him a lot of usage, or if the Broncos are better than expected. So while he doesn't carry insane upside due to his lack of efficiency, he still does have a pretty decent upside. And if you end up taking a tight end in the 2nd round, Melvin Gordon ends up being a really interesting target in the 3rd. There's a lot of red flags and risk just based around his efficiency. It's not like he's been a picture of health for his entire career, and we don't really know what the Broncos are going to end up doing with Philip Lindsay, but when you look at what Melvin Gordon's done in the past for fantasy, when you consider how much money the Broncos gave him in the offseason, I still think he's going to be fantasy relevant this year, and he ends up being a really good target if you don't take 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds. And if he falls to the 4th, then it becomes an even easier question to answer. But that is our take on Melvin Gordon. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you're looking for more videos like this, hit that like and subscribe button as we're going over 100 players in depth, giving you guys a key advantage in being able to understand players before you head into your draft. And thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.